I'm from Kentucky, a place with lots of wooded areas where people love their guns, including me. I used to not believe that there was anything unknown in the woods. I thought maybe Bigfoot could be real, but I severely doubted it. After this happened, I know there is something out there that we don't understand. I had just bought my first AR-15 style rifle and got a 60-round drum magazine for it at Gander Mountain while they were going out of business, because why not? I read that the drum was amazing and rarely had any issues, and this will be important later. A few days after I got it, I finally decided to take it out for a test run and sight in my gun a little better. That's when everything went wrong. As I mentioned earlier, Kentucky is heavily wooded. 3/4 of the land I lived on was just thick woods. There was a main path for driving our gator and a few small paths our cows had made in the woods. I decided to walk along our creek, which had a small path half cleared by our cows. At the end of the path is a big field where our cows graze and where I sight in guns when the cows aren't there. As soon as I crossed the fence to go to the field, I instantly felt like I was being watched closely. I brushed it off because I've walked back there 1,000 times before and never been bothered by anything. So, I kept walking, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched, but I was still aware of it. The walk to the field along the creek is very short, maybe 2 minutes at a slow pace. The further I walked, the more intense the feeling got, like I was getting closer to whatever was watching me. About halfway there, the feeling became so intense that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The drum magazine I had with me was unloaded, so I stopped and started loading it. I only brought 20 rounds with me because I was just going to sight in my gun, and 20 should have been plenty. Now I'm stopped, paying extremely close attention to what's going on around me and loading my magazine. The exact moment I started putting rounds in the drum, I smelled something dead, like it had been rotting in the sun for a while. I started looking around, and right behind me was what was left of a possum. It was torn to pieces. It almost seemed like it had been placed there for me to find. The strange thing was that it looked like it had been dead for maybe a day at most, yet the smell seemed like it came from something far more decomposed. This obviously didn't sit well with me, so I hurried up with loading the magazine. I guess I should have taken the dead possum as a last chance to turn around. I decided to keep going. I had never had any problems back there before, so I assumed my brain was just being paranoid. I was almost to the field when I saw it. I was at the end of the creek, and the feeling of being watched was unbearable. Just as I was near the end of the creek and the edge of the woods, I heard a splash in the water. On edge, I immediately turned toward the noise, gun ready but no round in the chamber. Walking down the creek away from me was something I will never forget. It was at least 8 feet tall, probably taller, and very skinny. Imagine a grown man that weighs 120 pounds. Now stretch him out to be 8 feet tall, but his body width stays the same. It had very long arms and it walked on 2 legs. Its skin was stretched tightly across its body. It made no noise aside from the splash when it stepped in the creek as it walked. It also had a very weird walk which was almost like a waddle, but it was taking really large steps. That could have been because it was on a muddy creek bank. It was also a light brown color, almost like the color of a deer. Now I knew why I felt like I was being watched. My magazine was loaded, bolt ready to send a round in the chamber. Remember what I said about the magazine being extremely reliable? I pressed the bolt release on the gun to chamber a round, just in case this monstrous thing decided to attack. I did not intend on striking first. The round got stuck somehow and didn't even budge out of the magazine. I had never used that magazine before, so it didn't fail from heavy use. A bolt closing from a gun has enough force to break your finger, so why didn't this magazine work? My only guess is that thing had something to do with it. The magazine never worked right again, and I had to return it to Magpul. Needless to say, I didn't tell them this happened. I just told them the magazine failed several times. Anyway, back to the creature. The gun jammed on the first round, which is usually the easiest. The thing booked it out of there without running or making a noise. I had just long enough exposure to it to get the details I provided about it. As for what the creature was, my friend who knows more about this stuff than I do, and I have decided it could have been a Wendigo. The reason we think it was a Wendigo is because everything I described matches them near perfectly. I had read that they are incredibly thin and tall and have a stench of death that follows them everywhere. That likely explains the smell by the possum. They are also very fast, can be light brown in color, and they sometimes violently kill other animals to scare humans. The only thing we couldn't figure out was its behavior. Why am I still alive? Wendigos are supposed to be incredibly aggressive. Aside from watching me, it did nothing. It didn't try to attack or confront me. It ran from me like it was scared or trying to draw me where it wanted me. That being said, I have never had another encounter with it. I have gone to the same field, taking the same path, expecting to be watched, and have not felt that same intense feeling as I did that day. Something was out there, and you can't convince me otherwise. I've tried to trick myself into thinking I'm being watched out there, but it still doesn't compare to that day. I'm Indonesian, and I have a second-hand account about orang pendek to share. My grandpa was born in Sumatra, and even though his dad was a Chinese immigrant, my grandpa pretty much lived there his whole life. You see, the island of Sumatra has many thick and dense forests, and if I remember correctly, there are many parts still left unexplored. My grandpa was quite adventurous when he was younger. He often went into the forest with his friends to hunt squirrels and other small wild animals. One day, my grandpa and his friends decided to go to another region in Sumatra and hunt in a more remote and unfamiliar forest. He said he got bored hunting in the same forest all the time. So, accompanied by his usual hunting friends, they hired a local guide and entered the forest. After hunting squirrels all day, they realized they were lost. Their local guide said he'd never seen that part of the forest before, which was strange because he made sure to stay in the area he was familiar with. My grandpa said it felt like they were hypnotized by unseen forces, and before they knew it, they ended up in an unfamiliar part of the forest. They tried to remain calm and assess the situation, and that's when they noticed it. Something was observing them from behind the bushes. My grandpa said it looked like a hybrid between a human and a chimpanzee and was kind of small, about as tall as an adult's waist. He couldn't explain it well because of how strange the creature was, but he remembered one particular detail about it. Its front feet were in reverse position, so when the creature walked, it looked like it was walking backward. The creature noticed my grandpa's party, was aware of its presence, and walked away from the scene. Strangely enough, the creature didn't run at all. So out of curiosity, the party decided to follow it. They arrived at an open area where a herd of these creatures had gathered. My grandpa said they were speaking some kind of unknown language, like a wildman language. The party decided that they'd had enough curiosity and that it was time to get out of there because they were in an unknown situation and could be in real danger. After walking for hours, they miraculously reached the edge of the forest sometime after sunrise, and luckily, the creatures didn't follow them at all. It's up to you to believe me or not, but one thing I know for sure is that my grandpa wasn't a liar. He kept telling us this story even after he reached a very old age. This story got me into cryptozoology, and of course I did some research on orang pendek. Some testimonies from natives across Sumatra were similar to my grandpa's. My grandparents had a vacation cabin in the Jersey Pine Barrens, and every year over summer vacation, my parents would send me there to visit. I was living in Las Vegas at the time. The last time I was there, I was 8 years old in 1982. It was about 11 or so at night. My grandparents were in bed and I was reading Archie comic books by flashlight. Suddenly, I heard the most terrifying scream coming from outside. It scared me to my core because I had no idea what it was. I'd heard mountain lions and coyotes before, and this scream was definitely different. I quickly turned off the flashlight, and the cabin was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Then I heard the scream again. This time, it sounded like it was right outside my bedroom window. I was absolutely terrified when I heard sniffing and snuffling noises just outside, followed by what sounded like pebbles being tossed or rolled on the roof. There was no way I was going to look outside, so I ran and woke up my grandpa. He saw the fear in my eyes, grabbed a light, and checked the perimeter of the cabin. He came back and said he couldn't see or hear anything. Needless to say, I slept in their bed that night. The next morning, we went outside to look under my window, and sure enough, we found hoof prints about the size of a fist coming from the woods right up to my window. At first, I thought it might have been a wild pig or something like that, but later, while playing on the other side of the house, I noticed a similar set of prints leading away from the house in almost an exact line from my bedroom window. When I got home, I told my dad about what happened and what we saw. He grew up around the Pine Barrens. He just casually said that it must have been the Jersey Devil. At the time, I had no idea what he was talking about, but I never forgot that incident. When I got a little older, I spent time in the library reading books about the Jersey Devil, and it sure sounds like that's what was outside my window that night. I never went back to Jersey to visit my grandparents while they still had that cabin. This happened to my son when he was 17 years old. We lived in New Mexico at the time. My son Cody was riding with his friends Drew and Alex. They were in Drew's truck with Drew driving. It was nighttime, and they were heading to Drew's house. Drew lived out in the country, so the road they were on was isolated and surrounded by desert. In fact, that whole area is flat and mostly dirt. As they were driving along, they saw a man standing in the middle of the road. Drew slowed down, and they all expected the man to move off to the side. The man didn't move. He just stood there. Drew slowed to a stop. The man was standing just outside the light from the headlights. He was wearing jeans and a long-sleeve shirt. They couldn't make out the features of his face, but they could tell he was facing them. For a few seconds, no one moved. The kids began to talk about going around him, but they weren't sure whether they should pass by him or turn around and find another way. Suddenly, the man dropped to all fours and started running toward the truck. All the kids started screaming as Drew slammed the truck into reverse and floored it. Now, they were going backward on this dark country road, with the man chasing them on all fours, and he was keeping up with the truck. Drew sped up, and finally, the man dropped out of sight. Drew turned the truck around, and they all came back to our house. I was in the living room when they came running in, slammed and locked the door, and raced upstairs to Cody's room. I went up to see what was going on, and that's when they told me the story. I've never seen them so pale and frightened. They were completely shaken. This happened on a Friday night around 8 p.m. These were kids who normally would rather be anywhere except home on a weekend. That weekend, they stayed at our place the entire time. They didn't go out at all and only left because they had school on Monday. It took a month before they wanted to go out again at night. They would go anywhere during the day, but at night, they usually gathered at our house. Even to this day, if I bring up that night, Cody and his friends get really quiet and look scared. It took them a long time to get past it, and they still believe that talking about it might make it come back. Please drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more horror stories.